What's up, my fellow philosophers? Stufer's Philosophy, the Drunken Philosopher here. I've been asked a few times before whether my atheism was the result of one big thing that all of a sudden threw me into atheism, or a series of small things that gradually led me to atheism over time. And as I think about that question, and I think about the things that led me to atheism, there are definitely big things that were big leaps in my journey towards atheism. There are also a lot of really small things, and I can think all the way back to when I was about 10 years old when I can remember having my first doubts. And they were all very little, and then later on as I got nearer and nearer to atheism, larger and larger leaps started to happen. But I think a lot about that, and I thought it might be interesting to share some of the more significant things that happened in my life that led me to rejecting the idea of God and eventually becoming an atheist. So let's go back to about 2006. That's when I watched the movie Troy. A lot of people trash that movie. I kind of like it. But during one scene, Achilles, played by Brad Pitt, chops off the head of a golden statue of Apollo that was built and stood in front of one of Troy's temples. Now, upon watching Achilles lop the head of Apollo off, his friend Eudorus looked at him, fear in his eyes, as he says to Achilles, "Apollo sees all. Maybe it's not wise to offend him." Upon hearing that, I laughed, and I declared, "Good on you, Achilles, for not succumbing to the silly myths of your time." I'd no sooner completed that thought when my thoughts then turned to Eudorus' reverence for God that I was certain did not exist, but for which Eudorus was absolutely certain did exist. He was so certain of Apollo's existence that he trembled in fear at simply having witnessed the desecration of a statue that was built in his honor. I was at the time a full-blown true blue Mormon. And I thought to myself, how would I feel if somebody walked into a Mormon temple and lopped the head off of a statue of Jesus? And suddenly, I empathized with Eudorus. And that's when I thought to myself, but what if I'm just as wrong about Jesus as Eudorus is about Apollo? What reason do I have to believe that my God is any more real than Eudorus' God? Well, I reasoned that when I look through a telescope at the sun, using proper filters, of course, I see no sign of a superhuman being carrying our local star across the sky via horse and chariot. But then, applying the same rationale to myself and Jesus, I realized that I've never seen Jesus either. I'd never seen a miracle performed in Jesus' name. I'd never had a single one of my prayers ever answered in any meaningful way. And I'd never had Jesus communicate with me in any obvious way. In fact, I realized that I'd never had a single experience that would clearly indicate to me that the God that I believed in existed at all. Sure, I believed him in, and all the people around me believed in him. And we would all get together and have warm fuzzy feelings and declare that communication from our God. But I have no doubt that Eudorus felt the same way, and all of his friends and all the people that he knew and the entire society in which he lived all felt the same way about Apollo. And that's all I had. The same thing that Eudorus had. A feeling that Jesus was real and existed. A feeling that I've been told I should have because everybody else has it, and if you don't have it, there must be something wrong with you, since I was 5 years old. And so the closest thing I had to evidence for the existence of Jesus were the testimonies of other people who had claimed to see him or claimed to communicate with him, but were wholly incapable of providing me with instruction on how I too could see him or communicate with him. I've been told more than once by believers trying to reconvert me back into the brainwashed way of Christianity that believing in Australia requires faith too, but I believe in it, don't I? Well, sure I do. I mean, the millions of cartographers in the world all agree that it's there. We have satellite photos. I've even played poker with people from Australia. I've seen it on television. I see shows broadcast from Australia. But no, I've never actually been there myself. I've never actually flown into space and looked down at Australia. And so, well, all those pictures could be photoshopped, right? No, seriously. I was actually told that by a believer, that I couldn't believe in Australia because the millions and millions and billions of pictures of Australia might all be fake. The NASA and the ESA and all the other space agencies and all the other countries that have satellites in space and have taken pictures of Australia, They might all be pulling the wool over our eyes. The millions and millions of people that claim to be from Australia are just pulling a big hoax on us all. Well, even if they are, I can easily prove to you the existence of Australia by just buying you a plane ticket there. Can you show me Jesus exists just as easily? And the answer, of course, is you can't, because showing that something that doesn't exist actually exists isn't really what I would call easy. But I continued believing in him. Why? Well, a few years prior to that, when the US went in and invaded Iraq, my father told me that if you repeat a lie often enough, people will start to believe it. And he was, of course, referring to the weapons of mass destruction that we were all told Iraq had. And people did believe it. And even though we went there and didn't find any, and toppled the entire government and replaced it with our own public government, we still have not found any weapons of mass destruction. Despite that, people today still believe that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And for me, well, I'd been getting told about Jesus and how he really exists, and how everything that we witness in our lives and everything that we experience are evidence of his existence. And I'd been getting told that lie for nearly 30 years. And I believed it. But the thoughts that day had never left me. Obviously, since I'm talking about them now. And the things that I thought about and learned that day kind of sat atop a pile, an ever-growing pile, that would eventually lead to my rejecting all gods and result in my atheism. As time goes on, I'll tell more stories about what's in that pile of stuff. But until then, if you have an experience that was a really significant impact on what turned you to atheism, let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, philosophy on, my fellow philosophers.